Hello, Global Village. Okay, if you're anything like me, you are feeling quite overwhelmed and dismayed at so many things that are going on in the world right now. And for me, making videos like this is really just my way of trying to push back against all the madness and insanity. Uh, in many respects, it reflects my incredible disappointment with humanity and the way we are behaving today and the destructive, self destructive, uh, self centered, short sighted things that we are doing is honestly baffling to me, primarily because we have such a rich body of historical evidence of our own folly, things that we did in the past, which we clearly demonstrated to be a path to our own demise. And yet, history does nothing but seem to repeat itself, and we just do the same old shit over and over again without learning. If you look at the kind of leadership, the quality of leadership that the world is inflicted with right now, and of course I'm talking about people like Donald Trump, uh, Benjamin Netanyahu, but there's a whole list of others. I would include, Vladimir Putin and, frankly, Zelensky as examples of people that ultimately do not serve the greater human cause, who are all just playing their part in the continued suffering and demise of the human project as we go forward. So, that grand canvas kind of put out there, what I'm really just doing here is I'm just want to zero in on a couple of things which are particularly bothering me at the moment, and I therefore just want to riff on. One of them is AI and the rampant and relentless pursuit of building ever more data centers, especially in the US, but not just limited to the US. It's a global phenomenon, but it is particularly problematic in the US. And how unbelievably destructive and unsustainable it is. Now, if anyone has listened to any previous videos I've made about AI, then my position should be pretty clear in that I'm highly skeptical of this current crop of large language models, generative AI that is sweeping the planet like some kind of hysteria. Because, don't get me wrong, this technology is impressive, but there's almost a kind of mystical cult being built around this technology, making it out to be something far beyond what it actually is. It's simply an evolution of machine learning, and it has surprised us in just how capable leveraging off this type of machine learning has proven itself to be, in terms of its ability to effectively mimic many of the types of functional activities that humans do, which we had previously thought to be purely the domain of our own intellect and our capabilities born of human consciousness, human sentience and reasoning. which in large degree has proven that that is not necessarily the case, and that these AI tools can perform quite similar functions that we do. But I think the critical thing to understand here is that these tools are mimicking our behavior. They're not replicating it. And this is a crucial, absolutely crucial point of difference that people are either genuinely just not understanding, or I think are exploiting this lack of comprehension to proselytize these tools as being far more revolutionary than they actually are, especially in terms of what their future capabilities might be. I believe that we have somewhat reached a plateau, and that we will be seeing ever decreasing returns, and that the whole idea of continuing to scale these models into ever more power-hungry data centers is a recipe for disaster and is not sustainable. I believe these data centers will become monuments to human greed in the years to come, and we will look back at the damage, the environmental damage, the damage caused to the economy, to the cities and towns that have been inflicted with these data centers, and realize it was just, again, the height of human greed and folly. Just to clarify my view here, machine learning is not a form of legitimate intelligence. In my personal opinion, trying to claim that these AI technologies are somehow more than a handheld calculator in essence is just fundamentally wrong. I do not believe that the so-called neural networks that are being used to perform deep learning, these transformer technology, these inference models, etc., are themselves some remarkable breakthrough that's going to lead to some sort of emergent super intelligence. This is mischievous hyperbole. It's nothing but flat-footed technology being leveraged in clever ways. I talked previously about how you could use matches and matchboxes to perform machine learning, and that you could train these matches and matchboxes to play a perfectly competent game of tic-tac-toe. And no one's claiming that these matchboxes are imbued with a kind of consciousness, sentience. At least no one serious. I understand panpsychism can very easily be inserted into the conversation here, but these are highly speculative fields of almost sort of philosophical endeavour that really have no place in a flat-footed and sensible conversation about what's truly going on right now in any sensible and productive way. So I'm not going to push that particular angle any further. I think, time will either prove me right or wrong, but it's my opinion that what's happening with AI is a bubble, and that these huge AI companies, Anthropic, OpenAI, Elon Musk's XAI, these are all stories that are going to end very badly further down the road. Now, it doesn't mean that this technology, these large language models, don't have a place in society, and that they can't be used productively and sensibly. I believe they can. I think software engineers are using these tools in a way that can genuinely help them as in terms of their development life cycle. There again, I believe there are problems. And I will speak to my own perspective when I first entered the industry as a developer, probably way back in I think it was the mid to late 1980s. Because when I entered the industry, there were a lot of developers who had been around for a lot longer than me and who remembered a time when, for example, you used punch cards to write your computer software. So you literally punched holes into cardboard cutouts to indicate instructions, which would then be run through a card reader in order to actually compile and then link your computer program. So what you would do is you would painstakingly punch out the opcodes for what effectively was assembler level and machine level programming onto punch cards, which would then be built into a computer program by running them through a card reader to produce the code. Now this process normally only happened once a day or maybe twice a day. An operator would come around and collect up all the cards from that the developer had painstakingly built and then stacked up in order, and then run them through the card reader to produce the code. So this would happen once a day, and if in fact there were any mistakes, then you lost an entire day, because it meant you had to go through, correct the error, and then give them back to the operators the following day, and they would do it all again. This meant you had to be incredibly fastidious. You really had to try your absolute best to make sure you got it right the first time around, because you lost so much time. And there was also the question of machine resources, because doing these compiles was CPU intensive and expensive. And the hardware back then was power hungry, and every CPU cycle wasted mattered. Now, what this actually meant was the developers in that era, who'd been around for a long time, were extremely thorough and extremely careful, and tended to produce the type of program code that, when you compiled it, often worked first time without any syntax errors, and was both correct in terms of not just the syntax errors, but often the logic, devoid of logic errors as well. The newer generation of developers like myself, we were spoiled because we had compilers that we could use anytime we wanted to use them, and our code could be based on the computer digitally in the form of, text files. For example, the COBOL language would just be, a file of text that you could then run through the compiler at your leisure. And it would immediately return back a suite of errors. But what this meant was you developed bad habits. So, for example, you would return back errors. You would look at the first error. You would simply go and correct that first error and recompile your code without even looking at the subsequent errors. And you would rationalize this by saying, well, if I correct the first error, that it may well also correct many of the subsequent errors being reported on. So that would save me the time of needlessly analyzing them. Now, this may or may not be true, and often you would correct an error, recompile, and then you would have more errors to deal with. So you would iteratively correct error after error until you finally produced clean code after X number of compilations. And this is inherently inefficient, because you are chewing up CPU cycles every time you did a compile, and consequently newer developers just used resources more recklessly than the older generation of developers, who treated the resource more, CPU cycles in the machine more respectfully. And this did cost the company real money, because many companies in that era were paying on a per CPU basis, on a CPU cycle basis. So at the end of the month, the company would receive a bill from someone like IBM or EDS, and it very much depended on how many CPU cycles they had consumed over the course of that month. And developers like myself who used the resource like it just didn't matter were not doing the company any favors. And I think this has a real parallel with what is happening with developers here and now, where you have new engineers who are becoming dependent on generative AI to produce and do a lot of the code for them, and in so doing introducing inefficiencies down the line as they repeatedly request these new tools to generate the code, which is putting the data centers under load as they consume billions and billions of CPU cycles to do this work, where a more independent and a developer who is willing to shoulder more of the workload up front could ultimately do that work a lot more efficiently, using their own brain, their capacity to think in a way that these AI tools simply don't think. Because at the end of the day, these machines don't rationalize and problem solve the way humans do. Not at all. They've simply mathematized human behavior and then mimic it. And it's just inherently more inefficient to do it that way. And so, you're kind of backloading all the work by not doing it up front. And I believe you introduce ultimately greater expense and cost by doing so. Anyway, I think that's all I wanted to say. I know I haven't made videos of this nature for a long time. I'm primarily interested in just getting my audiobook out there, whether or not anyone actually has any interest in it. I am deeply passionate about writing. It is what I want to do with what I have left of my life, and I feel like in a certain sense I can speak to how I feel about the world, my pain and disappointment about the world, but also my continued dogged hope that somehow humanity may yet prevail, and that we may, in some sense, have a beautiful future, a genuinely beautiful future, is a hope that I will carry with me to my last days. So despite everything, despite the fact that I think my writing may come across in some sense deeply cynical and negative, there is an underlying thread of hope that I refuse to give up on. Bendy out.